You spent 24 years telling yourself he simply vanished. No note, no warning, just an empty side of the closet and a wedding ring left on the kitchen. Counter like a coin dropped in a wishing well nobody asked him to visit. Then one gray October morning, an agency calls you about a new home care patient, a reclusive man recovering from a stroke on the edge of town, and you drive out there with your medical bag, never once suspecting that the stranger waiting behind that door has been waiting, in some quiet, unbearable way for you. You are Adelia Marchmont. You are 55 years old, a retired ER nurse turned private home care provider, living alone in a small converted carriage house on the outskirts of Millbrook Falls, Vermont. Your son Cassius, everyone calls him Cass, is 30 now, married, living 2 hours away in Burlington, and you talk to him every Sunday evening at exactly 6 o'clock. A ritual you've kept since he was 18 and first left for college. Because ritual, you've learned, is what holds a life together when the people who were supposed to hold it left instead. 24 years ago, your husband Ambrose disappeared. Not with a scene, not with another woman you ever found, not with debts you could trace to a name. He simply didn't come home from the hardware store one Tuesday evening. And by the time you called the police 3 days later, his truck had been found abandoned at a rest stop 2 states away, keys still in the ignition. You spent the first year certain he was dead. You spent the second year almost wishing he was. Because a body would have been a wound that eventually closed, and a vanishing was a wound that simply never stopped bleeding. Cass was 6. He stopped asking about his father around age 9. And you never knew if that was healing or just a child learning. The way you had to stop expecting an answer that wasn't coming. You built a life anyway. You raised Cass on double shifts and casserole dinners and a stubborn refusal to let one man's absence become the architecture of your son's childhood. You went back to school in your 30s, became a nurse, spent 2 decades in the ER at Millbrook, general watching other people's worst nights, which, strangely, made your own grief feel smaller by comparison, more survivable. When your knees finally gave out on the ER floor, you shifted into private home care nursing, quieter work, gentler hours, the kind of job where you sit with one patient at a time and actually get to know them, instead of triaging strangers in 5-minute windows. It's a cold Thursday morning in early October when the agency dispatcher calls you with a new case. An elderly adjacent man, 61, recovering from a moderate stroke, living alone on a remote property off Cutter's Mill Road, no family listed as emergency contact. Difficult and reclusive according to the 2 aides who tried and quit before you. Fair warning, the dispatcher says, he doesn't talk much. Might be the quietest patient we've had all year. You drive out along a winding dirt road lined with bare maples, past a rusted mailbox with no name on it, to a weathered farmhouse that looks like it's been slowly surrendering to the woods. Around it for a decade, the man who answers the door, or rather, who is wheeled to it by a walker he clearly resents needing, introduces himself simply as Roscoe Fenwick. He's tall, even hunched, with a gray-streaked beard he clearly hasn't trimmed since the stroke, guarded blue eyes that won't quite hold yours, and a left hand that trembles slightly from the residual weakness, the smallest finger missing at the top knuckle, an old injury he never explains. You're the new one, he says, not a question, already turning back into the house. The other 2 didn't last a week. I'm not an easy patient. I've handled harder, you tell him, and you mean it, though you don't yet know how true that sentence will turn out to be. For the first few weeks, Roscoe Fenwick is exactly what the dispatcher promised, silent, guarded, resistant to your help in the particular way of men, who've spent a long time being alone and have decided they prefer it that way. He flinches when you first check his blood pressure, as if unused to being touched at all. He keeps the farmhouse curtains drawn even at noon. He has almost no personal belongings, no photographs on the walls, no mail with his name on it beyond utility bills, nothing that tells you who he was before this. Stroke narrowed his life down to a recliner, and a walker and a nurse he clearly wishes weren't necessary. But you're patient, because patience is the one inheritance 24 years of raising a son alone actually gave you. You learn his rhythms. He likes his coffee black and too strong, the same way you take yours. He hums almost involuntarily, while you help him through his physical therapy exercises, a low, wandering tune you can't quite place, 3 notes repeated, a fragment of something. He watches the birds at a feeder outside his kitchen window with more attention than he gives most conversations, naming them under his breath. Chickadee, nuthatch, a flicker if he's lucky. The way someone names things. They've had a long time to study, alone with nothing else to do. By November, something in him softens. Incrementally, the way ice softens before anyone notices spring arriving. He starts asking you questions, not about your work, but about you. Where you grew up, whether you have children. You tell him about Cass, about his job in Burlington, about the Sunday phone calls, and something crosses Roscoe's face when you say your son's name, a flicker, gone almost before you register it, like a man remembering pain he'd trained himself to stop feeling. Cassius, he repeats quietly, testing the shape of the word. Good name. His father picked it, you say, and you don't know why you offer this small, unguarded fact to a stranger, except that something about the quiet farmhouse and the slow, accumulating trust between you invites confession the way a long drive at night invites it. He left when Cass was 6. Never came back. Never explained. Roscoe is very still for a moment, his trembling hand curled tightly around his coffee mug. Some men, he says finally, voice rough, convince themselves that leaving is a mercy, that the people they love are better off without whatever wreckage they'd bring by staying. That's a coward's math, you say, more sharply than you intend. Old anger surfacing uninvited. Yes, he says, and something in the single flat syllable sounds less like agreement and more like confession. It usually is. You don't think much of it that night. You've heard 100 variations of that. Sentiment from 100. Patients working through their own regrets in the privacy of a home care visit. You drive home along the dark, maple-lined road, and you don't yet know that the man you left humming 3 wandering notes in his recliner has spent the last hour, after you left, sitting in the dark with his face in his shaking hands. Over December, you and Roscoe fall into something that isn't quite friendship and isn't quite anything you have a name for, a wary, growing tenderness, built out of 3 months of shared silences and small daily rituals. You bring him a thermos of the strong black coffee he likes on the mornings he's too fatigued to make his own. He starts leaving the curtains open before you arrive, as though he wants you to find the house less like a hiding place. He tells you in fragments about a life before, the stroke that he's clearly editing, carefully, some kind of work with his hands, some kind of trouble he ran from, some kind of family he doesn't name, ever, though the shape of the absence is unmistakable, a hole he steps carefully around in. Every story the way you'd step around a hole in familiar ice. One gray afternoon in mid-December, while you're helping him through a set of hand-strengthening exercises meant to rebuild the dexterity, the stroke stole from his left side. You catch him staring at your hands instead of his own, specifically at the thin white indent on your ring finger, the ghost of a wedding band worn for years, and removed only once you'd stopped, believing its owner was coming back. You still wear the mark of it, he says quietly. After all this time, some things don't fully fade, you say, even when the person's gone. No, he agrees, and his voice cracks on the single word in a way that makes you look up sharply. They don't. That night, driving home, something nags at you that you can't name. The wandering 3-note hum, the flinch at your son's name, the missing knuckle on his smallest finger that you'd never quite let yourself examine too closely because you told yourself firmly that grief makes people see ghosts and strangers who simply resemble what they've lost. Except Ambrose lost the top of his smallest finger in a table saw accident 3 years before he disappeared, and you were the one who drove him to the ER and held his good hand while they stitched. The wound closed, and you remember, with a clarity that goes cold in your chest, that the lullaby he used to hum to baby Cass at 2 a.m, half asleep, was 3 wandering notes repeated over and over, a tune he said his own. Mother used to hum to him and never finished teaching him the rest of. You don't sleep that night. You sit at your kitchen table with a photograph album you haven't opened in a decade, and you find the one photograph you were looking for and dreading. Ambrose at 31, before the beard, before the years, laughing at something out of frame, his left hand resting on baby Cass's stomach, the smallest finger already missing its top knuckle. You drive out to Cutter's Mill Road. The next morning before your shift technically starts, heart hammering so hard you can feel it in your teeth. And when Roscoe Fenwick opens the door, Roscoe, not Ambrose, a name he built to bury a man he decided didn't deserve to keep existing, you don't say hello. You hold up the photograph, wordless, and you watch his face go through every stage of a 24-year-old Secret finally running out of road. Say my name, you tell him, voice shaking. My real name. Not Fenwick's patient, say it. He's silent for a long moment, his whole body trembling now, and not from the stroke. Adelia, he says finally. And it breaks something open in you to hear it in his real voice. The voice you buried with the rest of him 24 years ago. I've been saying it in my head every single day since October. I just never had the right to say it out loud. Where were you, you say? And it isn't a question anymore, it's a demand. 24 years of unanswered nights compressed into 3 words. 24 years, Ambrose. 24 years. And you let our son grow up thinking his father just evaporated. I was ashamed, he says, and the confession comes apart in pieces, jagged and unrehearsed. I lost everything, the shop, the savings, a debt I'd hidden from you because I was too proud to admit I'd failed. I told myself you and Cass deserved a clean start without the wreckage I was about to bring down on you. I told myself disappearing was mercy. I changed my name in the next state over. Took work with my hands where nobody asked questions. And every year I told myself I'd write, I'd call, I'd explain. And every year the shame got heavier instead of lighter. Until I didn't know how to come back without shattering both our lives all over again. You already shattered them, you say, and you're crying now. The kind of crying that comes from a place deeper than anger, deeper than 24 years of casseroles and double shifts and a son who stopped asking about his father at age 9. You don't get to call disappearing mercy. Mercy doesn't leave a 6-year-old checking the driveway for a truck that's never coming back. I know, he says, and he's crying too. An old man's tears, unguarded for the first time in front of you. I know, Adelia. I've known it every single day. I just didn't know how to undo it. So I let the years do what I was too much of a coward to do myself. I let them make it permanent. You stand in that doorway for a long time, the photograph trembling between your hands. 24 years of grief and 3 months of unknowing tenderness colliding into something you don't yet have a word for. You don't forgive him. Not that morning. Forgiveness, you've learned, isn't a door that opens all at once. It's a hallway, long and slow, and you've only just found yourself standing at its entrance. Cass has a family now, you say finally, quietly. A wife, a life you don't know anything about. If you want back into it, even a little, you don't get to ask me to build that bridge for you. You build it yourself. You call him. You say the words you should have said 24 years ago. And you let him decide what happens after that. Will you tell me if he says no? Ambrose asks, and his voice is so small, so unlike the guarded reclusive man who wouldn't meet your eyes in October. That's something in you. Not forgiveness, but recognition, maybe, of the frightened man underneath the coward, cracks open despite yourself. I'll tell him you're alive, you say. What he does with that is his to decide. Not yours, not mine. 3 weeks later, on a cold January evening, your phone rings at exactly 6 o'clock, your ritual hour, and Cass's voice on the other end is quieter than you've heard it in years. He called me, Cass says. Dad called me. You don't say anything. Just hold the phone against your ear and wait. The way you've waited 24 years for a version of this sentence. I don't know how I feel, Cass admits, but I think I want to hear him say it to my face. Whatever it is, I think I've been waiting for it longer than I let myself admit. 6 weeks after that, you're the one who drives Ambrose, no longer Roscoe, the name finally, quietly retired, to a small diner in Burlington, and you sit 2 tables away while he and Cass talk for 2 hours. Your son's shoulders tight with old anger softening, incrementally, into something you recognize because you felt it yourself, in the hallway, on your way toward wherever forgiveness eventually leads. You don't know, watching them, whether you'll ever fully forgive the 24 years. You don't know whether the man who left is the same man who hummed 3 wandering notes while you helped rebuild the strength in his ruined hand. But you know this. The son who once stopped asking about his father at age 9 is, tonight, asking questions again. And somewhere in that small diner booth, 2 people who'd both convinced themselves a door was permanently closed are learning, slowly, painfully, that some doors only ever needed someone brave enough to knock. That spring, you visit the farmhouse on Cutter's Mill Road one last time. Not as his nurse anymore, he's graduated. To an aide from the agency who never has to carry 24 years of history. Through that door, but as perhaps something you still don't have a clean word for. On the kitchen table, where there was once nothing personal at all, sits a single photograph in a small frame. Ambrose at 31, laughing, his hand on baby Cass's stomach. The same photograph you held up in the doorway in December, except now it isn't hidden anymore. It's the only thing on display in the whole house. I kept that in a drawer for 24 years, he tells you. I was afraid if I looked at it too long, I'd finally have the courage to come back. And I didn't think I deserved that courage. Turns out courage doesn't ask permission. It just shows up one Thursday morning with a photograph in its hand. You don't answer him. You just look for a long moment at the small framed photograph of a family that broke and is now, slowly, carefully, learning what it means to mend, not back into what it was, but into something new, built out of the wreckage the way the hardest, truest things usually are. If you'd let someone back into your life after this many years, even if forgiveness took a long, slow hallway to walk down, tell me in the comments below. And if this story reached you, subscribe for next week, when we tell the story of a boss who fired a young single mother for being late, never knowing she was rushing home from her son's hospital room every single morning.